Hi, this is Steve Bookbinder, your sales coach. In our previous video, we looked at the psychology of selling. Today, we'll look at how do we build a question strategy that'll help us uncover selling opportunities by getting our customers to engage with us on a level below the surface, which is the level that people tend to stay on when talking to salespeople. We will capture their attention and change their view of us. Better questions lead to better conversations, and done right, it also leads to an improved relationship because second-level questions lead to them viewing you as a trusted advisor. Conversational dynamics. Studies of human brains reveal electrical patterns when people think of different words and memories. When two people are talking, their brains are more aligned from an electrical circuit point of view than at any other time. For a while, the two brains mirror each other, but soon the listener's brain races ahead, guessing where the other may be going. Once the customer's brain is out of sync with you, assume they've missed your last point. Think about the kinds of things you say in everyday conversations. They are musical in their rhythms. Hi, how are you? The little jokes. There's a cadence to those chats, fast, with a few pauses, except just before they conclude. We begin to think that all pauses are signals that our conversation is about to conclude, which may be why we fear them so much and try to fill them. Yet we need to pause and to think and to consider each moment of the sales conversation. How do we balance the right sound with the right level of thoughtfulness? Ultimately, sales conversations are about making suggestions. Salespeople are essentially suggesting their services to their customers all the time. Pushing your suggestions onto people that are not open to them, well, that's the definition of unsolicited advice. Are you open to unsolicited advice? Most people are not. To get your advice to sound invited rather than unsolicited, we must indirectly get to the advice by first asking. The customer assumes the seller doesn't know and wants the salesperson to ask the right question, so make sure you're asking. Listening. Unless the customer witnesses the salesperson listening, and then restating to confirm their understanding, they're not confident the seller really heard it. Learning. Beyond hearing the words, learning implies understanding the ramifications, understanding the world the customer lives in, and proving that by the words they use to restate the customer's goals and challenges. And then, after you've asked and listened and learned, now they're open for you to help them. Now they're ready to hear your advice. Sometimes we need to get there in pieces, and so we break our big questions down. We may find the conversation moves along better by framing our big questions by leading up to them with indirectly asked smaller questions. For example, I want to talk to you about selling you a quality pen, but I may begin by indirectly asking you if you like going to museums. Have you ever seen a famous handwritten document? Do you know that they use special pens to give those documents just the right look? How important are handwritten documents in your life? I may do it that way rather than directly asking it this way. If I had a great pen, would you consider buying it? At the heart of information gathering is the art of the sales conversation, best seen through the lens of these three concepts. Give and take. Why do we ask questions? Framing questions. Give and take. A normal conversation begins with an established cadence reflecting our setting and our deference and our respect for each other's opinions. And when we're giving too much information, the other side has pent-up demand to tell their side. On the other hand, if we don't add enough content to satisfy the customer, the listener, their comments will get progressively shorter as a kind of a signal for us to change our pattern, to step up and take over the next part of the conversation, or drop the subject and end the meeting. 3 reasons that we ask questions in sales conversations. The first is to get a reaction. The second, to change the subject. And the third is to learn something new. Once you get in the habit of asking questions that change the subject and get a reaction, in a case where you've anticipated what you'll hear, you will be able to control the conversation in a much more effective way. And the more in control you'll be, the easier it is to listen to what they're saying. Finally, framing questions. We frame in three ways: open, closed, and statements which encourage confirmation. Open versus closed questions. Closed questions often provide answers which are not helpful, especially when they lead the customer or partially answer the question they're asking because of some assumed agreement. For example, asking, "I know that you are aware of the pending compliance changes and assume you will be prioritizing this issue. Will you be looking into this matter soon?" Well, the only real answer to that is either yes or no, because it's a yes-no question. A no answer leads to more questions. But instead, consider rephrasing the question into the largest open-ended question that takes it all in. What will you be focusing in on over the next few months? Most closed-ended questions don't encourage the other side to talk more than the minimum necessary, which is never a good thing in a sales meeting. Customers will happily answer questions until we reach a point of diminishing returns when they expect the salesperson to tell them something they don't know or give them potentially helpful information. Sometimes we can accomplish more by asking a question in the form of a statement that encourages a correction. People don't always feel comfortable answering open-ended questions before credibility and relevance is properly established, but we all tend to correct people when they're wrong. So if you said, "So tell me your plans for achieving compliance by the deadline date," they'll either correct or confirm what you said, opening the door for you to ask more clarifying questions as they begin their response. I like to think about the meeting from the customer's point of view. If the salesperson creates the right give and take with correctly framed questions, the customer's perception is that the salesperson is more curious, cares more than most salespeople, and is truly trying to understand the customer before force-fitting a solution. Conversational flow, listening for and understanding changing conversational patterns, nonverbal and body language, silence and pacing. Let's break that down. Before people answer verbally, they react physically. There may be a contradiction between their physical signs and their words. Their physical reactions are not necessarily coming from a well-thought-out plan like their words would, unless they're a trained undercover spy. Hints as to their real thoughts can be found by looking at nonverbal, the way they're communicating with us nonverbally, which we can see in their eyes, their expression, their posture, tone, their hands, their pacing, their breathing, their volume, etc. When their body language says one thing, but their words contradict, well, we need to double check by gently asking checking questions, like if they said that they had no concern about the price, but they were touching their face, I might ask, "I have a feeling that you're not happy if the cost increase was more than you're paying now. Is that right?" All of a sudden, what we'll see is that their whole body language will change as they reveal what they're truly feeling. How much pre-thought has the customer given our meeting? When they give me answers and they tell me stories, I'm asking myself, why have they chosen to tell me that story in that way? Why did they include some facts but avoid others? Are they engaging me using their System 1, autopilot, talk to the salesperson off the top of their head mode, or are they giving me well-considered answers? One way I can tell is by looking at physical changes, which may happen in micro-reactions after I state my question. Are they starting their answer right on top of my question without pausing? The only people who do that are the ones who are listening for a particular question, or weren't listening close enough and heard a few keywords and launched into their autopilot answer. Or people who are trying to avoid a topic by dismissing it right away and batting it away with a quickly returned answer. But if they are seriously considering what we ask them, we should see the following. Eyes. Their pupils will dilate. When you're using the part of your brain you need to work up a well-considered answer, your pupils automatically dilate. Hands. Are they open? Palms up suggests literally that they're open to helping us versus a closed hand, like a fist around a pen, for example, or steepled where their fingertips are touching, which suggests that they're less open to us, more suspicious. Verbally, are they pausing before they speak to gather their thoughts or rushing into their answers? They may directly answer our question or take an indirect approach, a circuitous route to their point, which suggests that they had decided before you spoke how they would react to a particular question. And now they're trying to roll out their rehearsed answer without sounding rehearsed. Breathing. We may see or hear their breathing rate change. And you should always listen for this on phone meetings. And listen for the pace. Is it even? Is it different than their default pace when we began the call? Or are they suddenly speeding up? People tend to say things faster when they're saying them and have said them many times before, but they tend to say it slower and make verbal mistakes when they're saying it for the first time. Well, their reaction is going to tell us how open they are to receiving our sales advice, our sales suggestions. Always assume people barely communicate. We tend to believe everyone who sees what we see will share our views, our interpretation of events, when in fact, each of us has a unique view of reality. Well, with a better relationship and fewer distractions coupled with the right clarifying questions, then we can improve our communication. Nothing improves communication better than improving the quality of our relationship. And that quality is a factor of three things. What we talk about, the number of times we talk, and where we are when we're talking. You'll see that as you change the number of times you talk, and the subject you're talking about, and where you are moving from their office to yours to neutral sites, it changes the relationship over time. Distractions. Assume people have an attention span like our own, which is always going in and out. So assume you're always losing them. Assume they're trying to get ahead of us mentally. Assume they're not there, so we need to constantly re-engage with them. And finally, understanding. Do you ever have a conversation where something comes up you don't really understand? Sometimes, in conversations, we realize we don't really understand, but we have to weigh looking foolish versus moving on. Well, it's far better in the long term to clear up any misunderstanding. I'd rather risk the looking foolish and asking than having a misunderstanding. And I want to do that as early as possible in the sales process. So, what are the key takeaways of this section? First, help. When are people most receptive to our help? When they don't perceive it as unsolicited. Framing. In order to ask indirect questions, we need to be prepared what to ask. The good news is we can anticipate the answers, especially if we rehearse and role play and practice sales conversations with our peers before we do them in real life. And we can use that learning to adjust our questions, and so we can ask them and ask the right thing in just the right way. Open-ended questions asked through a series of indirect questions require the most preparation, but yield the best information. Be aware when the customer is asking you a series of carefully thought-out indirect questions. And finally, relationship. The same questions get different answers as the quality of your relationship changes. Find new ways to ask old questions as you get to know each other. Part 3. How to apply these second-level questions to sales conversations. The right conversation is purposeful, yet sounds spontaneous. The levers that control that effect or that performance are questions with answers, long and short, stay versus change. Your topic, that is. Let's look at questions with answers. Typically, when the customer asks the salesperson a question, that salesperson often feels like a singer who's been called back on stage for an encore. We want to tell a great answer and keep checking while we're answering that question with the customer to make sure they're following and they're interested. And we'll keep doing that until they give us a very strong signal to stop. And until then, we'll just keep talking. Well, long and short statements are followed by questions help us avoid this trap. I want you to end your thoughts with questions. Get in the habit of practically interrupting yourself, your own words, to ask them a question. It pulls them back in and helps maintain the right conversational balance. We need to be strategic how we handle conversations when we need to ask questions while they're looking for answers. So I recommend you practice delivering your answer, your explanation of your solution in parts, while interrupting yourself to ask them clarifying questions. You have to remember where you were in your presentation. But if you do that, it'll remain interactive. Staying on topic, let's discuss that. Either you or the customer will change the topic throughout the meeting. Our clarifying questions actually keep us on the topic, but sometimes we need to change the topic to regain their interest. And often we leave that topic so we can move on to our favorite topic, which is our relevant offering. It's usually necessary to revisit topics throughout the meeting, come back to topics, revisit topics in order to balance their talking about their goals with our talking about our relevant solutions. Consider what happens when you begin conversations with direct and indirect versions of these questions. The opportunity to ask the right questions happens early in the conversations when you're deepest in the autopilot version of you, maybe simply trading socially greeting questions, automatic answers that we typically tack onto the front and the back of conversations, and the end of the conversation when we're just about to end it and we realize, we didn't have all the information yet and we're running out of time. The great conversation follows a logical line of conversation. What was the original starting point? It happened so fast. We missed the question that guided the conversation toward the topic we wanted to get into. I want you to get in the habit of listening for the impact of seemingly innocent first questions. What do we really want to know? How do we ask directly or indirectly? Open-ended? Closed-ended? Do we make a statement designed to be corrected? Is that how we ask these questions? Somehow we have to go beyond determining if they're qualified. As early as possible in the sales process, we need to learn, are they going to buy from me? Are they ever going to buy from me? If yes, when? When all is said and done, how complicated will this sale be to get? I prefer to close the easiest sale because I can get to more easy sales each year. I need an early warning system so I can properly manage my time before getting involved with complicated multi-decision maker kind of sales, especially because of the risk of inertia and delay. So we need to find a way to ask these questions, and we need to change our conversations if we're to end up with better outcomes. Power listening, understanding the difference between reacting and responding. Our System 1 is built to create a story with only a few facts. It's our System 2 that collects all the information before drawing conclusions. Our System 1 is always working, and our System 2 is lazy. And it's for this reason that we're quick to rush to judgment, but it's so hard to unlearn and then relearn and change our original thinking. So be on the alert for this by getting into the habit of following up customer responses with clarifying questions. Those clarifying questions also are much more comfortable than other forms of questions. If we ask the customer a question, and then they answer, and then we ask an unrelated question, and then they answer that one, and then we ask another unrelated question, and they answer that one, we're engaging in an interrogation, not a conversation. The seller will notice each progressive answer starting to get shorter. The customer's wondering, why are we asking these questions? How is this line of question answering eventually going to help the salesperson help the customer? The customer only gets to talk about what the seller asked and cannot expand on their answer. But consider that the seller is probably more ready for this conversation than the customer. When the customer answers your question, they're doing it without rehearsal. You may be asking a question that they've never answered before. Or, if you're the third salesperson to meet that customer recently to discuss the same issue, it's likely that the previous salespeople also asked your questions. The customer recognizes the question and remembers back to their original answer and all the ways they could have answered. And maybe they've thought about their original off the top of their head answer, and now they've reconsidered it, and now they've talked to a coworker or looked into the matter, and they're more ready to answer the question now. One way of determining all of this is the timing between the question and the complete answer. I believe the more senior level the customer is, the more considerations they will have before they answer any salesperson's question. Before they answer, they're wondering, they're thinking, who is this salesperson? What is my relationship with them? What have I told others who've asked me that question? And if the salesperson asked about productivity or adding more people or investing in upgrading their technology, or partners, what did the customer tell the press, or their board, or their boss, or their coworkers? And given all there is to think about, the salesperson needs to give them time to answer. So don't be afraid of the silence. Let them pause before they answer and a chance to add on to their answer. You'll find that if they begin to give you an answer that they've had to really seriously consider, and you don't rush to fill the pause, they may rush to fill the pause as soon as they've gone through their thought process. We give them a chance to answer our question, and we do that by using follow-up questions like where, who, what, where, and most important, why. And when we do, we sound more like we're interested, curious, and we sound like we care about understanding the customer completely. Following that kind of conversation, the customer or the prospect is more willing to believe that the salesperson is now better informed and is in a better position to make a valuable suggestion. Qualifying, knowing what to look for. These are the key questions that we need a real answer for. So let's think about, what did we learn from this section? How can we apply second-level questions to sales conversations? Balance talking with listening to them by changing topics. Change the end of the meeting by beginning with a second-level starter question early on in the meeting. Pause. Allow the pause. Give the customer enough time to fully consider and then complete their answer to your questions. I look forward to working with you to help you apply these principles to your sales conversations. Until then, please contact me directly if you have any questions.